All right, so personification. This is John Updike, example number 1. This is the ex-basketball player, is the poem's name. Off work, he hangs around May's luncheonette. Grease gray and kind of coiled, he plays pinball, smokes those thin cigars, nurses lemon phosphates. Flick seldom says a word to May, just nods. Beyond her face toward bright applauding tears of Necco wafers, nibs, and juju beads. Here, bright applauding tears of candy. And again, this brings forth the fact that he presumably used to have lots of people cheering for him when he was a basketball player. But now that he's an ex-basketball player, this sort of is what his life has become, right? It's a total different season. And then here, the description of kind of coiled. He's sort of in the corner. And he's playing pinball now, which doesn't require athletic skill. But he's kind of coiled, like he's kind of hunched over. A vision of him that is probably very much so the opposite of what his life used to be like. So, and that's probably why the title is called the ex-basketball player, sort of implying this demarcation between his life when he was a basketball player and then now afterwards. But this personification, again, you're basically applying human traits, qualities, attributes, actions, even thoughts, but it's not a human. Right, so it's personification. Again, it's for poetic effect. What is the reason why, I'll see these last 2 lines of this stanza, they're bright applauding tears of Necco wafers, nibs, and juju beads, is the difference, right, in his life, in his experience. He used to hear a real crowd, and now this is sort of obviously a fake crowd. It's just, they're inanimate objects, right? It's just candy that's supposedly cheering for him. So applauding tears. So even though they're not speaking, the fact that they're applauding, only humans applaud, right? Animals can't applaud. They don't normally applaud. I mean, I guess you could ascribe to them applauding characteristics, like a dog howling that's excited or wagging his or her tail. But the actual applauding, when you're cheering, when you're clapping, I mean, that's obviously personification. Example number 2, this is Emily Dickinson, phenomenal. These are terrific examples of poetry, and they deploy a lot of the literary devices that are so evident and so apparent and that are referenced in a lot of top-notch literary essays. And that's what we're working on in this class. I really want you guys to be able to think from the top down, from the moment you read the poem to thinking about what you might write about and then what literary devices. It's really helpful to glean a lot from a lot of these examples. So example 2, Emily Dickinson, she sweeps with many colored brooms and leaves the shreds behind. Oh, housewife in the evening west, come back and dust the pond. So the reason I brought in this example is because this obviously is personification, because we find out later, it might not be obvious now, but there's a hint. And it says housewife in the evening west. What is available, what happens in the evening west, in the west? The sun sets. Sun sets in the west. So evening west. So there are hints. And again, this has to do with, if you're learning about this in class, your teacher's probably going to go over it. So this is why you want to listen, take notes. You also might have one of the students in your class who discusses it, maybe brings it up. He or she does some research on his or her own. So that's why it's helpful to listen in class. But also, if you spot some of these pieces of evidence, there's a real joy in discovery. And that's what's so fun about poetry, is there's a real joy. Like, you might see this and say, oh, evening west, is Emily Dickinson's speaker here talking about the sun? And then you look for other context clues. Also, title might be helpful. I mean, there's a lot of pieces of evidence that might help you to see and hear what the speaker is talking about. But yeah, this is definitely personification. This has to do with the sun rising and the sun setting. She sweeps, right? Sweeps across the sky with many colored brooms. Obviously, there are bright days, there are cloudy days, many colored brooms, and leaves the shreds behind. Oh, housewife in the evening west, come back and dust the pond. So definitely personification, and you could reference in each of these poems how personification clearly makes a point, clearly defends the point of the poet and obviously of the speaker, of what is this poem focused on. Remember, each poem is focused on a couple of things. It's not like they're focused on like 500 things. That's what's great about poetry, is that they're pretty small digestible pieces of literature, usually, unless it's like an epic poem, but they're relatively digestible. There's a lot there to unpack though, so you want to read them slowly, obviously read them multiple times, but they're kind of fun because there's just a specific flavor that you will get And that flavor is what you should probably talk about in your essay. You should talk about all the obvious stuff, or the obvious theme, or the obvious tone, the obvious trope. You're definitely not going to talk about the sun in example one. You're going to talk about how personification, and there's probably more personification if this poem is much longer, that reminds the reader of his different life, of Flick, his starkly different life when he was an athlete, when he was being probably fawned over and cheered about when he was a basketball player, and now that he's an ex-basketball player, his life is totally different. And so those literary devices are used to illustrate and convey clearly, cogently, and creatively that demarcation, that bifurcation, right? That divides his life into basketball player and then ex-basketball player. And then for the second poem, the personification is more about bringing the sun to something that is very relatable, eminently relatable to the reader, and interesting and intriguing. And there's an emotional connection that the person, right? And that's why it's personification, right? Because people relate to people. So if you can personify these inanimate objects, like the sun, for example, then there's a way in emotionally for the reader to connect even more so with whatever the topic of the poem is about. So it's a pretty powerful literary device, and I think it's important to learn.